Tonight, we begin with a diplomatic announcement that U.S. officials, European leaders, and international observers had anticipated, debated, and quietly prepared for over many months. An announcement that unfolded not over weeks of back-channel maneuvering, but in a matter of hours that shifted the trajectory of this war, reignited hopes for millions of displaced Ukrainians, and forced Moscow to confront a reality it has long tried to avoid. What President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said today crossed a threshold that diplomats had hoped would one day be reached. For the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, Ukraine is openly signaling that detailed peace proposals to end the war could be presented to Russia within days, not sometime in the distant future. This is not a trial balloon or a piece of political theater. It is a calculated move by a wartime leader who understands that seizing the diplomatic initiative is as important as holding territory on the battlefield. For more than 3 years, there have been subtle signs, unpublicized calls, quiet visits, sudden schedule changes that something was taking shape behind closed doors in Kyiv. Zelenskyy has been defiant, but his defiance has never been random. His moves have followed a pattern that Western capitals learned to read. When that pattern suddenly went quiet, when routine briefings were canceled, when his nightly addresses shortened or paused, when diplomatic staff movements no longer matched public schedules, intelligence officials from Washington to Brussels took notice, because when Ukraine goes quiet at the top, something big is usually coming. Early this morning, senior U.S. and European officials detected an unusual spike in diplomatic activity. Secure calls between Kyiv and key intermediaries, including Turkey and Gulf states, intensified consultations with EU leaders, and quiet outreach to countries that have tried to remain neutral. These are the kinds of moves Ukraine only makes when it is signaling something specific: readiness to negotiate a shift in war aims or an attempt to define what a just peace would look like on its own terms. In a carefully worded interview, Zelenskyy confirmed what many had suspected. Ukraine has prepared a concrete framework for peace and is prepared to put it in front of Russia within days, adding that Ukraine is ready. The question is whether Russia is capable of accepting a just peace. That line was aimed at multiple audiences at once. To Moscow, it said, "We are not begging, we are setting terms." To Western allies, it said, "We are serious, we are responsible, we are not prolonging this war for its own sake." To the Ukrainian people, it said, "We are fighting for peace, not for endless war." The response from Western capitals was immediate and unusually unified. Officials in Washington, London, Paris, and Berlin described Ukraine's move as serious, strategic, and genuine, stressing that Kyiv had done the hard internal work needed to present a coherent national position. But peace proposals only matter if both sides engage in good faith, and Moscow's first reaction suggested it was not ready to do so. Within hours, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova dismissed the idea as another propaganda exercise, and Kremlin messaging insisted Ukraine must first accept military realities on the ground, code for recognizing Russian territorial claims. These were not the words of a government eager to explore compromise. They were automatic rejections meant for domestic consumption. Yet that same rejection underscores why Zelenskyy chose this moment. Diplomatic sources say Ukraine's framework addresses every core issue: the status of Crimea and the Donbass, the future of Russian-occupied territories in the south, timelines and mechanisms for withdrawal of Russian forces, legally binding security guarantees from multiple countries, the use of frozen Russian assets for reconstruction, accountability for war crimes under international law, and broad prisoner exchanges. It is not a simplistic peace at any price document, nor an ultimatum demanding immediate Russian surrender. Instead, it sets out a phased, monitored process that would require Russia to make real choices in full view of the international community. By placing such a structured proposal on the table, Zelenskyy is doing something crucial: shifting the burden of proof. For months, Russian officials have claimed that Ukraine and the West are the ones blocking negotiations. Now, with a detailed Ukrainian plan poised to be delivered, that narrative becomes far harder to sustain. If Moscow rejects or ignores the plan, it will be Russia, not Ukraine, that looks unwilling to end the war. If it engages even reluctantly, Ukraine has already framed the discussion around its own principles: sovereignty, security, and justice. This is why analysts describe today as not just a diplomatic move, but a strategic test. Behind the scenes, Ukraine's diplomatic machine has been working at full speed. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba has been briefing counterparts across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Ukrainian ambassadors in neutral or non-aligned states have been instructed to present the proposals as a test of seriousness for Russia and a chance for those countries to play a constructive role. International organizations, from the UN to regional bodies, are being quietly prepared for the possibility that they may be asked to monitor or guarantee parts of an eventual deal. At the same time, historical reality hangs over every conversation. Russia launched this war expecting Kyiv to fall in days, expecting Zelenskyy to flee, expecting Western unity to crack under economic pressure. Instead, Ukraine has held, Zelenskyy has remained, and Western support, though politically contentious, has largely endured. Russian forces have suffered heavy losses, sanctions have reshaped its economy, and its reputation as a military giant has been badly damaged. In that context, a Ukraine that can both resist on the battlefield and lead diplomatically is not something the Kremlin ever wanted to face. The timing of this initiative also reflects the pressures on both leaders. Putin faces a rigid political system in which hardliners demand escalation and victory, business elites quietly want normalization, military commanders demand more resources, and ordinary Russians grow weary of casualty-less and economic uncertainty. Zelenskyy, for his part, must reassure citizens living under constant threat that there is a path out of war that does not mean surrender, while convincing Western governments wrestling with domestic politics that continued support is part of a credible strategy to reach peace, not an open-ended commitment without an endgame. In Washington, the White House underscored that Russia's swift rejection of the idea of proposals was inconsistent with any genuine interest in peace, unusually blunt language indicating that the U.S. does not want Moscow to hide behind vague talk of negotiations. At home, Zelenskyy told Ukrainians, "We have never wanted this war. We want peace that is just and lasting, one that guarantees our children will never again face such aggression." And he promised that any proposal would recognize reality without surrendering our sovereignty. Meanwhile, the war itself has not paused. Russian forces continue to attack along several fronts. Missiles and drones still target cities and infrastructure, and nuclear rhetoric from Moscow has edged up, again, reminders that any diplomatic opening exists against the backdrop of continued violence. Analysts outline several possible paths from here. Russia could continue to dismiss Ukraine's move in public while testing elements of the proposal through back channels. It could try to issue its own counter-proposal focused on locking in territorial gains and freezing the conflict, hoping to split Western opinion. Or it could reject the initiative entirely and escalate further, claiming Ukraine's terms are proof it is not serious about peace. By advancing a plan that is neither maximalist nor capitulatory, Zelenskyy has made that last narrative far less credible in the eyes of much of the world. What we are witnessing now is a test of intentions, resilience, and international will. Ukraine wants to show that it is the side seeking a fair and enforceable peace. Russia wants to avoid looking weak while refusing terms that would expose the costs of its own decisions. The US and Europe want an end to the war that does not reward aggression or invite future invasions. Neutral states want to be on the right side of history without being dragged fully into either camp. As diplomats study the emerging framework and wait to see how the Kremlin ultimately responds, one thing is already clear. Zelenskyy has moved the conflict into a new phase, where the question is no longer simply who gains or loses ground, but who is prepared to define, accept, and implement a just end to the war. And tonight, for the first time in months, there are signs of uncertainty in Moscow. Less noisy triumphalism, more guarded wording, more silence between official statements. That kind of quiet from the Kremlin is rarely comforting. It usually means choices are being weighed that were not part of the original plan. Whatever Russia decides, this moment has shown once again that Ukraine will not be coerced into surrender, will not be written out of its own future, and will not accept any peace that fails to protect its sovereignty and its people. The war is not over, but the battle over how it might end has entered a new and decisive stage, and the world is watching.